I am DM Zone. This is Gamers Oasis. Let's get into it. Okay, guys, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about all second level magic user spells. This is all the spells you're going to find in the 1974 rules, plus the ones you find that come in the supplements thereafter. This is for original Dungeons and Dragons. This was a bunch of videos I put together to make it easier for you to view. I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, guys, we're going to talk real quickly about the Continual Light spell. This spell can be cast by elves and magic users. I refer to them as arcane casters, and this spell is going to be important. Clerics and those type of casters, I refer to them as divine casters. Now, in the past, I've talked about how clerics have always had like a little bit of a benefit or a bonus when it comes to casting spells that they share with the arcane path. Usually it's increased duration or ranged or both, this type of stuff. This one here, they kind of say the quiet part out loud. I'll go ahead and read this real quickly, and then you can tell me whether or not you pick it up in the comments down below. Okay, so this spell can be cast anywhere the caster wants. So you can cast it on a marble, you can cast it on a coin, whatever you want to do. Slide it under the doorway to illuminate the other side. Throw the marble down the hallway, very helpful. Roll it down a hill, see how far it goes, this type of stuff. Got it. Okay, great. It sheds a circle of illumination 24 inches diameter. Now that ends up being 240 feet diameter. Again, war game type mechanics. We'll cover that again later. It does not count as full daylight. Okay, so it's not as bright as you would get when you go fully outside. It remains in play until dispelled. It could be either countered with a dispel magic. It could be countered with some form of darkness spell and then be removed. And it can do this out to 20 or 12 inches, which is 120 feet. But did anyone catch the quiet part? Let me read sort of the cleric side. In the cleric side, it says that the light is equal to full daylight. Now, they even underline is. What do they mean by that? Do they mean that if a vampire walks in front of it, that they're going to explode in the fire and run away? I don't think that's exactly it. Literally, the word is underlined. Well, here's what it means to me. I don't think a vampire is going to turn into a ball of fire and run away. I think, though, that the part that says that the vampire must return to its dirt-laid coffin from its homeland and rest is true. So if you trapped a vampire in a room with its coffin, it has to return to that coffin even against its will. So while you're doing other things and all these things, and it can still fight back, it is fighting back while walking backwards and going to its coffin. That takes away a lot of its ability and what it can do. Also, the other two of the three places that it's inside book number 2 for the little brown books is when it's talking about goblins and when it's talking about orcs. In that particular one, it says that goblins and orcs both get a -1 to hit and to morale saves. That's pretty big. I mean, when you start figuring on these small dice what that actually means, that's a pretty big to do. If you're using a D20, if you saw my Bless video, I would change that to a D20 would be -3 to attack. And if you're doing the man or fantasy, I would say that's -2 because it's rolling 2d6 versus 1d6. I would apply that to the same thing with this if you happen to see the other. In this video, we're going to talk about the spell Darkness. It's not the same as it was in other editions. Many things about the spell changed from the original Dungeons & Dragons. This spell came out in Supplement 1, which is why some of the wording's a little bit different, but even before that, some of the wording was done very differently. It says that it is only a 5-foot radius. 5-foot radius sounds very typical for modern day, but for that time era, they didn't use feet, they used inches because it was designed to go around your character. So that's a little bit odd. 5 foot was like a very small radius too. And it doesn't say whether you cast it on a person or an object. The reason why they used inches back then was because in war games, you'd use these inches to measure out to a certain thing. I think this spell was around earlier and was used to counter light and continual light as it was wrote earlier. It just wasn't actually portrayed in any of the books, but it was used at the table, and they realized, hey, we should probably add this to the game. Also, the exactness to which what it says is weird. It says that it's complete darkness, to the point that even infravision doesn't penetrate and is not able to perceive anything within it. I will unpack that in a minute. But let's go ahead and jump on to the next part. It can be counterspelled by Dispel Magic or any light spell. Obviously, I think this was designed to be the reverse of light. Whoever is last remains, essentially, or maybe they nuke each other and it goes to normal light. The last mechanic that I'll talk about that is specifically a spell mechanic is the fact that it lasts for 6 turns and that it is a 12-inch range, which means you can cast it away from you out to 12 inches. So in the same spell, we have 5 feet and we have 12 inches. It can make this spell a little hard to unpack and understand what's going on, in my opinion. Also, it talks about the fact that it's a complete black, unable for infravision to penetrate it. It refers to it sort of as being like a true black. For those who don't know, true black is actually really rare and hard to get to. What we consider to be black when put next to true black is actually noticeable, let alone other colors which are more poppy, that pop off the thing more because of the fact that that is an actual true black. Now, I'm not saying that people with infravision don't ever see nothing. That is a thing that they do. If you look at the mechanics of infravision, it talks about the fact that they have a 60-foot or a 6-inch infravision. Essentially, they see out 60 feet. So if they're on a castle wall, unless something is coming close to them, they're not going to see it. If they're on the top of a downhill slope, they're not going to see anything. If they look up into the sky, they're not going to see anything unless something's within that 60 feet. Where this spell becomes weird is you're in a 5-foot or a 10-foot wide hallway, and there's like a 5-foot radius of no items, when there should at least be a floor and a wall or something. And this could be a moving 5-foot sphere because there's nothing that says that this can't be cast on an object, like, for example, could be cast on a coin or a marble and rolled down the hallway, creating this darkness in unusual places. It's a great way for thieves to be able to move about without having them be detected. I feel like this is a point of conflict, though, because does the darkness radiate from the point of interest, or does it just exist in that 5-foot radius? What I'm saying is, could you cover it with a blanket to hide it and then uncover it to reveal it? Both of these have mechanical advantages, and it would have to be something you and your referee would have to decide what you want to do. Also, what's the difference between a void, like a complete darkness void, and something else in the world? Some trap maybe, like Sphere of Annihilation or something of that. How could this be used? How could this be perceived outside of this? Okay, so we're talking about the spell Detect Evil. This spell actually has a lot more depth into it and probably won't be answered completely in this video because some parts of it are going to be beyond the scope of this video. Let's go ahead and talk about what it means, though, in original Dungeons & Dragons. So this spell can be cast by both elves and magic users as well as clerics. Clerics get an improvement upon it, which often happens when you have spells that are able to be cast by both sides of the magic, shall we say. In this particular case, it's a tripling of the duration from 2 turns to 6 turns, and a doubling of the range from 6 inches or 60 feet to 12 inches or 120 feet. Now let's go ahead and dive into understanding the concepts of this right now, and then we'll break down into how this could be a little bit of a problem. Alignment in original Dungeons & Dragons is not 1-for-1. First of all, there is no evil. There is no good. There's law, neutral, and chaos. Since it is not 1-for-1, it's really hard to know what's evil. Can a neutral creature be evil? Can a lawful creature be evil? Does one action switch it from one to the other? Based upon the book 3 Hearts, 3 Lions, I would say there's some gray area and there's some ability to move your alignment a little bit one way or the other based upon what you're wanting from yourself. That a single act doesn't cascade you towards a specific area only, if that makes sense. In this particular reference, I'm talking about the Swan, if you've read that book. So if a neutral creature can do evil and a lawful creature can do evil, when does it show up as evil? If the creature doesn't even know you exist, has never known your species, relationship, your religion, nothing about you, but then immediately sees you and then thinks evil thoughts, is that when it shows up as evil? Or does it know all the time that this creature is going to think you're evil and going to take evil action against you? How does that work? Is it predicting the future? Is it reading minds? Is it ever wrong? I feel like there's a lot of questions. Does this spell eliminate, like, freedom of choice? I think that's a lot for a first level spell. I think what really means is you need to find out what this means between you and your referee. This spell is going to be used against you. You need to kind of know when and if it's effective at all. You're going to want to use this spell, and you're going to need to know sort of the parameters. Not the specifics, but the parameters in which the spell would be useful. Think of Boromir from Lord of the Rings. His heart was one way. He really believed he was doing the right thing. The story comes out, maybe it's not quite the right thing. Maybe there's an evil in the heart. Maybe there's something corrupting it. What pops evil? Do items pop evil? Does the item itself that's making him evil, do they both pop evil? Saying, hey, this guy is no longer in his own cognitive thought process. He's now controlled. So if you have an intelligent item and you cast Detect Evil, and it is evil, is that a way to identify that is an intelligent item? I just think there are so many questions. And again, you want to get with your referee on this. As long as you and your referee come to an agreement, I think you're going to have a good time with this spell, and I think it's very important. Obviously, you want your cleric doing it. It's a very good version with the cleric. It is very specific and decent with a magic user. Okay, guys, so in this one here, we're going to talk about the Detect Invisible Spell. This was a spell that was in original Dungeons & Dragons. It got kind of relabeled later to like See Invisible and this type of stuff. But it was designed to be the direct inverse or reverse, or the cancelization, I guess you could say, the spelling of the Invisibility Spell. It says it's supposed to work on objects, but the text literally right below it says it works on both creatures and objects. It specifically says that it will locate and reveal the secret treasures hidden by the Invisibility Spell. And then in the next line, it's talking about creatures that are invisible. So literally, this thing is designed to work on both. I don't know why they worded it that way. There's a couple things that are a little bit weird on this one. The spell lasts for 6 turns, so a good amount of length. The range, though, kind of is both static and changes based upon the caster level. So this spell says it like this. Range, is 1 inch times the level of the magic user casting it, i.e. wizard would have a range of 11 inches. More if he was above the base value. Some might find that hard to unpack unless they understand what titles were, or if they were new to it, or if they played many editions and they were continuously interchanging in conversation magic user and wizard, like many of us do. You might find that a little hard. I'm guilty of, for sure, the second. But the answer to that is actually easier than one might think. See, 11th level magic user is the first level that a magic user then turns into the title of wizard. So it was actually a wizard. It was not a class yet. It was just a title, kind of like Lord and Hero and that type of stuff. Myrmidon for 6th level fighter. You get my point. Now, why is it that we're using a subset of a subset to be able to determine what we could just say simply with plain English. Well, that would be what's called a Gygaxianism. And that is where Gygax used a bunch of words. Some of them are English, some of them are a little bit foreign, some of them are like the English version of foreign words that are usually older, that meet in some sort of weird mix of cultures and language to make the games he made. And he was very well known for this. Personally, I had a situation in my own games where this spell would have been very useful. They were going into a tower. It was very scary. The party was very much on unease. There was an item there they were looking for that was supposedly evil that they had to destroy. They end up finding this orb that touched one of them and had some sort of reaction, but they really didn't know what it was because they made their save. And it was invisible, and it rolled away from them. And instead of them going to go look for it more, they decided, nope, we're done, and they left. So if they at least would have had the spell, they could have maybe seen the spell, knocked the invisibility off it, and then maybe figured it out or found a way to safely carry it like, Gandalf did when they found the orb in, Return of the King or whatever it was.
So we're going to talk briefly about the ESP spell. The ESP spell is one of those often overlooked spells that is far greater or better, more utility, I guess you could say, than what most people think it has. If a magic user or someone using a scroll thinks, I think I want to go offense only, I think they're missing an opportunity to save them and the other people's lives around them. It basically works like this. It's like a mobile alarm spell that lasts for 6 turns. What it does is it allows the magic user typically to be able to detect things that are hiding from them that have intelligence. This could be either on the inside of the wall, on the other side of a door, as long as it's not more than 2 feet of solid stone or a thin coating of lead, which was often used in many forms of scrying to protect that object from being scryed upon or remote viewing and those type of things. You couldn't see into a chest if it was coated with lead, for example, on the inside or outside. But it allows the magic user to be able to see into darkness. It allows them to be able to call out the thief that they know is there, but they can't see, but they want to act like they're that kind of a gracious host, shall we say. Hey, you who are hiding over there, why don't you step out and join the rest of us, and so we can marvel at your skill of being able to conceal yourself. It allows them to bring this to the attention of other people while maybe being ambushed. It also allows them to avoid ambushes. That's a pretty big thing too. It allows a little bit of a humble brag, but it doesn't allow them to be able to read their mind. When I originally saw ESP, I thought it was like a potion of read people's minds. No, it's just detect. You detect that there's intelligent life around you. So if you are being ambushed by a zombie because it's stumbling out and you didn't see it and it's not really planned to ambush you, it just is there, you're not going to know that. But the goblin who is hiding, the archers are in waiting, the whatever, as they're sitting there thinking, you're going to walk up and see or sense that these things are there in basically the approximate location of them. It doesn't necessarily say it like outlines anything or anything like that. So how you do it, like with the thumbnail, if that's how you do it, I think is fine. I just think you need to be consistent with how that works from the referee down, obviously, not the players down. Though I think it should be a discussion between those two groups. Again, this spell has the charm and the simplicity of early original Dungeons & Dragons. There's no save throw. There's no way to avoid it unless you're covered in lead. There's no magical protections that prevent you from being able to have your thoughts detected, though there are technically medallions of ESP immunity in some versions, and I think that would be an appropriate one here too. It lasts for 6 turns, which is a very long time, especially in a dungeon.
I've been saying it lasts for 6 turns. I mean it lasts for 12 turns. It has a 6-inch range, so anything within 60 feet, you're able to detect their thoughts. This is massive inside a dungeon. You could, depending on the type of dungeon or the type of place you're in, detect the thoughts of things through several walls because there's not 2 foot of solid stone. So yeah, it's bigger than what I think a lot of people give it credit for.
So in this video, we're going to talk about one of the more classic spells that actually refers back to chainmail, called Invisibility. This truly classic spell has some of the old school charm that we all love about these original D&D spells. For example, the power of it is that it doesn't actually require touch to be able to cast a spell. It can be cast up to 240 feet away or 24 inches on the sand table. This statement is not just massive that it can be cast at range, but it can be cast on a person or a thing. There is no description of how big a thing could be, so I would say probably human size. I would also say that if an object is run into, person or thing, that it would be as if it was attacking and then would break its invisibility. Looking closer at the chainmail rules, though, which this spell refers back to, it talks about sprites having minor air distortions and shadows. This seems oddly specific to sprites, maybe because of the nature of their thing. I wouldn't necessarily say this is an all thing, but what I would say is it opens the door to the differences, the nuances that an alert, aware target could have or subject could have about noticing the fact that there's someone invisible around them. When talking about elves and fairy, it says they cannot attack unless someone has the ability to detect them. So they can be detected while invisible. Now, it says in chainmail that dragons can see invisible targets up to 15 inches. That would for sure be detecting them. But it also says that wraiths and superheroes with an unknown range are able to detect them as well. I would say that is probably due to their ability to see into the underworld or the life force or that type of thing in the case of the wraith, or in the case of the superhero, their martial prowess and being able to navigate these situations better, making someone like a Conan be able to detect a stalking wizard who's trying to avoid conflict. How sword and sorcery of them. So outside of the use for this spell, could start having non-typical responses, shall we say. Hiding treasure in plain sight, making a door invisible or turning an object invisible so that it looks like it's no longer there. What happens when you look through the door or that object? Maybe it's a picture frame. Do you see a static image of the wall or the hallway behind it? Or do you see what the magic user or elf believes would be happening on the other side? How closely does this fall into that classification I kind of covered when I was talking about Phantasmal Force Spell? The illusion. Does it share a lot of the same qualities? Does it sit in the same place on your table? I think a lot of these are things you're going to have to discuss and go over with your party. Classic to original Dungeons & Dragons, there could be a lot more details that are given in this spell, other than just making reference to a completely different game system in chainmail. I would say it would be hard or nearly impossible for a person to last over 24 hours without having their invisibility broken. This wasn't necessarily meant to be stacked days and days and days so the entire party could hide. However, I wouldn't necessarily remove that from the players themselves. I would come to some sort of agreement to what that means at the table so that everyone is aware before trying to take some sort of action with this spell.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about a real quick spell here. This spell is called Knock. This spell is pretty much straightforward. It opens doors, unlocks certain things. One would not be surprised to find out that it unlocks Wizard Lock, the spell, and Held Portals, which is a first level spell. You would not be surprised to find out that it unlocks mundane locks, like a porculus or a barred door or something of that nature, or something with like a chest or something of that nature. I think you'd be a little surprised to know that It also unlocks secret doors, though. So if you have a secret door and you can't find a way through it, you can use this to go ahead and get through that door. So when the elf has the ability to know the door is there, they have also, if they have the spell, to be able to use that spell to open that door if they can't figure it out on their own. That to me is pretty ingenious. I don't think that carries through all the editions. I thought about this some, and I thought, you know what, there's a lot of other ways this can be done too. Like, for example, what if you put a big carpet out there, have a trap door down there, that people don't trigger the door, so you just cast knock, and boom, they fall through the trap door and go into the pit, and whatever happens, happens. What if you were to have a ceiling trap kind of like that, and you were to unlock that door and whatever fell out on top of them, or it was like an escape route for someone or of that nature? What if you were to use that as a way to distract a person? You're sitting there having a conversation with them, and the spell knock gets cast on the far side of the room, and a door opens, and they all turn looking ready for it. No one goes through it. You act surprised and whatever, and maybe use a little feint of hand and get them to pay attention to that. Well, you just kind of slip out the back, through a normal walkway, and no one ever comes through that door. It's just a weird thing. The door opens. What if you did that and a tiger actually came out, or something of that nature, or your buddies knew, hey, it's time to go help the wizard. He opened the door for us. Things like that. Like, there's a lot of things that could be really interesting. Have slime drop onto the heads, like was it Nickelodeon type of situation. I think that type of stuff could be really interesting. I would be very, I would give a lot of levity to this spell. This is a second level spell, and I don't feel like it's the most powerful spell in the world. So if there are multiple locks on the door, I would have it open all of those locks. If there was a trap on the door, I would say it safely sets off the trap, or maybe not safely if it's like a gas, but it would for sure set the trap off. Anything that requires like the mechanicals inside the lock mechanisms, the position of the door, the fact the door is shut, all that type of stuff would be triggered when the door opens. I would also say it's open forcefully and not really a subtle thing that's done quietly. Not that the door slams all the way open or whatever, but for sure it's opened ajar, and it has a little bit of a carry to it type of thing. I think that making it distinct in that way would be very good. Now, the spell can be cast out to 60 feet, so you don't have to be touching the door when you do it. Therefore, the wizard could literally assist the rogue being able to get into the palace. He sees the rogue go up to the door, go to get in. He unlocks the door. The rogue slips in, shuts the door behind him. Bingo, bango, bongo. No one's wiser. I think these type of things work very well. Okay, guys, so we're going to talk about the spell Levitate. This spell is one of the more unusual spells probably in the list because it only has really two stats. It has duration and it has range. Technically, there's some movement involved in there, but I'll get into what that means and actually how slow that is in a second. So it might surprise you this spell didn't come out in the original 3 core rulebooks. It came out in Supplement 1, Greyhawk. That meant that it was not out when the game first came out. As I have said in several other videos, the old original Dungeons & Dragons spells tend to hold a certain amount of charm because of their power. This spell both has that and then really shows how limiting it is. At the same time, it's also very confusing when you look at the range statistic, but I'll get to that in just one second. So one of the things that makes it so powerful is the fact that you can raise yourself an inch off the ground, use your staff to push yourself around like you're a canoe in a canal, like around Venice or something like that, basically navigating the dungeon, never actually touching anything, essentially making yourself immune to pit traps and a lot of floor-based activated things, especially if you had a longer than a staff, like maybe a 10-foot pole, to push yourself around the dungeon. Now, the actual spell says you can float up to the top and use your hands to navigate by walking on the ceiling. But you could do this with a staff too. Now let's go ahead and talk about the speed real quick, and then we'll jump into the rest of why this spell is confusing. So it says that you raise 6 inches or 60 feet over a turn, which is actually 10 minutes. So if you break that down to a minute, that's 6 feet a minute. So in a combat round, that's like 8 inches. You're not getting out of trouble fast enough to really get away from this thing. You're basically facing a problem. You're going to get killed unless you're already high up. But the good news is, if the ceiling's high enough, you can actually be above any sort of melee combatant, and they'd have to use range to go after you with that spell. That's a lot of power. If the ceiling is really high, you could actually be outside of most things. If you were to have a pit trap, you could literally float across the pit trap and not have any problems. So now we're going to talk about range. Why does it have range, and what does that mean? The duration is one of the biggest powerful parts. It lasts for 6 turns plus a turn per level. So this will last the entirety of the dungeon. The fact that one can have this spell going and it has a range doesn't make sense. You're never moving away from the origin of the spell. It doesn't have anything that says you're tied to this location. It literally says you can move. It has such a long duration. What is it saying? I personally believe, because it doesn't say this anywhere in there, that you can cast this on other objects or people. Now, if it's a person or a thing with intelligence, they can resist this, preventing the spell from affecting them, or they can end the spell with a magic save. If they make their save, they prevent the spell from affecting them. However, you could use this to navigate going over a pit. You could cast this on your guy in full plate and have him cross a river. As long as you stay within range, you're never going to have this spell end, though it could end abruptly if you go outside of range. I think that is where the power is with this type of thing. Okay, guys, hot take real quick. What if I were to cast that on my enemy and he fails to save? Now he's sitting there levitating 1 inch off the ground or 8 inches off of the ground, and he can't get away. He can't move. He can't pursue. He can't chase. What if that person is an important part of the leadership? What if you did that to a door and you levitated the door above, and then you just end the spell and it drops? Interesting things.
Okay guys, in this video we're going to talk about the Locate Object spell. This spell is both the least damaging spell in the game probably, and the least utility spell in the game. Okay, this spell misses the mark, which is ironic because it is locating objects. That both really isn't a utility spell or a damaging spell. It has more information wrote about it than a lot of spells in the book. Yet it really doesn't tell you everything you need to know. For example, there's nothing about duration, and it doesn't tell you how far away things are. Now, there are some pros and some cons, and I definitely think that the referee and the players at the table can figure this out. I think if they agree, then you're golden. Let's say you are a 5th level caster. If you are a magic user, the spell has a range of 110 feet, or 11 inches on the sand table. If you're a cleric, you get 140 feet, which is 14 inches on the sand table. That really isn't very far. I mean, that's within a battle generally. Or maybe if you're in a maze, you can kind of get an idea where something is. Now, I know, people are like, how would you use a spell? What would you do with it? Well, there are basically 3 ways that I can see this spell being used. If you're looking for something very specific, like if you're in a brand new city where you don't know where things are at, you're inside a maze and you're looking for the way out, you're looking for the city square and you don't know where it is, you can cast the spell and then not have to ask for directions. Or you might be able to find the way down or up, for example, because those are commonly known things. You know, the other way this could be used, and this kind of tracks with a different video that's actually coming up this Saturday, but if you have a very specific item on a person, maybe you put it there using the Felch ability of Pickpocket, you are going to be able to know where that is. You know, it could be a specific map, it could be an artifact of, you know, unique origin. Maybe it's something specific to that person, like maybe it's a pirate with a tri-brim hat that's purple with a feather that's dipped in gold. You know what that is. Let's say you're wanting the negative response. So you cast the spell knowing whether or not the captain is in town yet, and the spell fails. Well, now you know that he's not within the range of the spell, let's say 110 feet. If you're near the port, that's a good sign. That means they haven't made it to town yet. You might be able to get set up, or you might be able to leave and not run directly into the captain. Those are good things. So I personally feel like this could be cast in two different ways. If you were to do the spell at my table, I think this is a good way. There's method A. It's a longer range spell. The distance from the target is still unknown, just like it is in the normal spell. But instead of it being feet, it's miles. So you know when you wake up and you cast the spell that the person you're tracking is that way. But because you're 5th level, it could be 11 to 14 miles away, depending on your class. So you just start traveling that way, and it gives you a rough direction of which way you're going. Now, there is some nuance to that. If you check and in 30 minutes you check again, and the angle, the direction they are away from you is greater, then they could be close. If it's very minute, then they might be 11 to 14 miles away. And, or you might be going the same direction. So none of that is perfect. But method B, it goes back to use the feet of the spell. But instead of not knowing how many feet away they are, you now know how many feet away they are. The other thing, and I would change this for both method A and B, is that I would make it a flat duration of like 8 to 10 hours maybe for magic users and clerics. And I would make it either a D4 or a D6 plus 1 for every 3 levels. So a 6th level cleric or magic user would get +2, a 5th level would get +1. And that would give you the number of times you can ask basically where the object is. So if you use it twice and you rolled a 1 on either a D6 or a D4, you don't know, but that is your last one. You only know if you have it again. And after you cast it the last time, the spell fades and you're like, crud. The spell's over.
Okay, guys, so we're going to talk about the Magic Mouth spell. This spell came out in Supplement 1 Greyhawk. It was not part of the original 3 books. However, it's probably one of the more iconic spells that is found in most modules and in a lot of stories people talk about, mostly because it's fun and because of the funny moments that it causes. The actual spell is detailed kind of like this. It follows many of the rules of ventriloquism, which I've already done a video on. If you want to check that out, I'll try and link to it up above. But it comes from a very specific place on an item. Where this is specifically, either it will have a mouth that will start to animate, or a mouth will appear and will start to animate. The spell, aka the mouth, can be given instructions to activate, like when anyone moves within 10 feet, when someone neutral comes within 10 feet, or maybe when specifically Flubbit the Wizard comes within 10 feet. The spell lasts until the message is given and then it fades away. This is a 25-word message or less, so not very long. I will say that this spell is often used in the combination with other spells, like maybe an extend spell if there's those type of things in your game, a permanency spell, these type of things. Some people have like little interactions where you can ask questions and they can respond. Though it was not technically intended for that, I certainly see a higher level version of this being able to do that type of thing. A lot of times it's more used though for like comedic interactions with an NPC that is not specific to any one thing or place or whatever, that could just appear and then be gone, or like to an extension of the personality of the wizard you're interacting with, or maybe as an alert to certain things if someone comes around it. Over here type of thing. This spell is meant to be fun. It's not meant to be diagnosed and detailed and all very specific. I think if one looks too hard into how does it know if someone is neutral, or how do they know that is Flubbit the Wizard? Is there a way to fool it? I think the spell kind of breaks down a little bit. But I think there are some good questions to ask in there, like how does it react if it's placed in water? If there's no air to make the per se sound, is the sound itself magical? Does it require breath? I think there's some logic that could be applied to it. Is the size of the mouth going to affect the pitch? If it's a very loud mouth, does it drop in volume? If you put it on a coin, does it go higher pitch? So high maybe it just sounds like a whistle and you can't actually understand the words? So I think we need to also look a little deeper into triggers. Like, what are the other triggers that could come into this? If I were to change it to a specific race, like let's say if a goblin comes within 10 feet, it shouts goblin, goblin, goblin. If an orc comes within 10 feet, or if a troll or giant or rust monster, or maybe anything not dwarf, it shouts other, other, other. I think there's all sorts of things like that that could be interesting. I think this also naturally brings up the question, what are the other things that could trigger? Is it just presence? Or do certain actions, maybe something that could be labeled, like maybe pickpockets, or if someone's attacking another, or maybe open locks, or is escaping? Can it understand the difference between an inmate being escorted down the hallway by a guard or an inmate escaping a jail? I think there's a lot of things like this that can make this spell very powerful, even though it does no damage. I don't want to sap the fun out of it, but I think this is something you need to know when you sit down at the table before people get too excited about having it. I envision a magic user with maybe a necklace full of rings or of coins that are like copper coins with holes punched through it, that has these coins all over it so they can hear goblin, goblin, or troll, so that the party knows that the magic user has this thing too close to it, or it's being attacked, or a cacophony of things. If the ogre grabs the goblin and throws it into the magic user as an attack, the craziness that could come from that. I have saved this spell for a while. It's one of my personal favorites. This version of it sets the framework, but a lot of the mechanics of what makes it awesome are not set yet. I'm talking about, of course, mirror image. Let's break down how this spell works while talking briefly about the possible problems you could run into with the spell as it goes. The user creates from 1 to 4 images of themselves. So a D4, no problem. We got that. That seems simple enough. Before I go into the next part, though, I feel like it's important to know that these images take up visual space, not technically physical space, for what is for sure an illusion of the user. These images are indistinguishable from the user, as they do exactly what the user does. So this to me sounds very exact, and might be hard for someone to wrap it around their head what's being said. So let me change the wording a little bit to a 1-to-1 ratio. So if I reach my right hand out, all the images reach their right hand out. If I step to my right, all the images step to the right. That's what it's trying to say here. And I think in general this is good. However, there are some issues. So if everything is 1-to-1 and I reach my right hand out to turn a doorknob, the D4 other images also reach their hand out to a non-existent door handle because they are reaching out the same direction, the same angle, the same everything. If I then turn the doorknob, open the door, and walk through it, some of those images may not make it through the doorway because they are separate from me and the doorway may be too narrow. Some of these images might be affected by people walking down the street, or may make people push away from them, or may be floating in air because they are standing over the edge of a dock or something of that nature. And this kind of leads me to where I question the one-for-one behavior and the exactness of what it's trying to say here. I get the spirit of it. As I discussed before, these images take up a visual space. You don't want them walking off ledges or through walls, if that makes sense. Before I get too far into this, let me go back to the spell. Any attack upon a mirror image dispels it, but it doesn't affect any other images that might exist. And the spell lasts for 6 turns, aka 60 minutes. Okay, so the framework is set up. We now have the general rough idea of what's going on. These images take up a 1-to-1 space. This is, in my opinion, more of a generalization. This is an illusion, so therefore the illusion has the ability to be manipulative, in my opinion, and not some cold statistic. Okay, so moving on with this is an illusion. It's not going to do anything that the magic itself would break the illusion thereof. So when I reach my right hand out to turn the doorknob, this makes sense within the spell, as in all the hands reach out, a d4 hands plus mine, reaches out and turns the doorknob. Or they kind of blur the edges. You're not exactly sure where my hand ends and where their hand begins, and it kind of looks like it should work, and then it separates and moves like a school of fish. They don't move in a normal pattern, but they all seem to go in the same direction, if that makes sense. This is something that you and the referee should come to some sort of agreement on. My perspective is one-to-one movement is a generalization. It's not a strict rule. This is an illusion, therefore it's not going to do anything that would cause the spell itself to be broke, because the spell is interacting with static terrain. I don't think that these images have intelligence. I just think the magic works it out. But I think now the real question is, what happens when the thief runs up with a handful of caltrops and he throws them at the user in all D4 images? Is that one attack, or is that a handful attacks? And do all these images have a chance to go away? Or do they roll separate attack rolls? Or do we just count it as one attack roll and they're all gone? I think that's a fine line, and I think that that is the rock, paper, scissors of the game. In my world, yes. In this video, we're going to be talking about the spell Phantasmal Force. This is another second level spell. This is a magic user spell or an elf spell. This spell could be very difficult, and with very few mechanics that were not narrative, that were actual mechanics in the game that were descriptive, this spell probably be very difficult to understand. So this spell refers to several what might be perceived as mechanics. It has concentration, illusion, touched, living creatures, no limits on duration, damage, real, and it has a 24-inch range. There is no mechanic actually describing what concentration means. The consistency of what you're trying to do is there, but does it require line of sight? Does it require your mental focus? Can you talk? Can you walk? That, I think, is going to come down to what you and the referee decide at the game table. The only one that is truly a mechanic in the game would be the 24 inches, aka 240 feet, but that's about it. When you get into all these other terms, it's going to have to be something that the referee and the players have decided at the table how this is going to work, preferably before the spell is cast or even thought of. Okay, the spell refers to both real and illusion. So if you fail your save versus the spell, or you haven't tested it yet, is it considered real? Do you think that it's that? If you cast a spell at it and it doesn't hit, like what happens? Do you then get a save? What's touch mean in this aspect? How does damage work? If it attacks and hits you, do you have to make a save then? If you make your save, then do you not take damage? I think these are things you're going to have to figure out. Also, how much is damage? If it's a mouse that's attacking because you're trying to scare something, does it do the same amount of damage as if you had like a boulder fall on someone's head? I think all these things can be worked out, but you either need to pick a specific type of damage, in my opinion, something that is prescribed to the thing, or figure out how you're going to do this, because this is an area effect spell, which means multiple people could be affected by this. So if you created a swarm of rats that went out and attacked 5 people, does it hit each one of the 5 people if they fail their saves, if they get saves? I think that's kind of where the problem is with this spell. So let me go ahead and reference how I would do it, so that if a player wanted to be creative and have a rabbit, like in the Monty Python skit, where it has the rabbit of Carabanog, I think that's pretty close. And they wanted to have that in their game, that they'd be allowed to have this razor-toothed rabbit running around doing damage. I would say that probably a D4 damage if you're targeting multiple people. If a person fails, how does that affect everyone else? I would say yes. So, for example, if you're underneath the effects of silence, you wouldn't necessarily know that. If you are blinded by darkness or by another spell or some other thing, or you're facing the wrong way potentially, then I would say probably not. If there's a wall between you two, probably not, unless you could hear that this is a fake, this is a spell, this is an illusion, or you have knowledge of this person being able to do this type of stuff, then you probably would get a save. I would say that if they were to do a single target, that would be a D8. I could see something like that being that, but I wouldn't go bigger in a D8. This is a persistent thing. There's no technical duration. People will make their save throws. This will end. Concentration probably will be broke. If you get hit, I would say you probably have had your concentration broken. I would say also if the spell ever becomes obvious that it's not correct. So for example, if you have a fire elemental in water, that's going to break the reality of it and would give people a chance to make a save throw. If the dragon somehow makes it through a doorway that's too small without shape shifting, which you wouldn't be able necessarily to do, I would say that they would get a save throw. Okay guys, so we're going to talk real quickly about a spell that has some new vocabulary in it. I know a lot of these spells do, but this one is the first time I've ever seen a multi-purpose spell actually in the description. That's something normally the players explore and find on their own without the authors coming to you and saying, this is something new. Okay, why do I say that? Well, the Pyrotechnics Spell is truly one of these spells that embraces that by actually requiring that the source of the effect is not actually something the spell itself produce. What I'm trying to get at is the spell doesn't manifest fire. The spell has to manipulate fire to be able to do more fire-like things. Some of the things the spell can do is it can increase the size of the fire. It can create a flash of light, creating like a strobe-like effect, and it can increase the smoke. The book refers to this being sort of like a firework going off. I could see this in other ways too, but that's kind of the example they give with it. Now they also have some suggestions for size of the fire. Now they recommend torch, brazier, and bonfire, and etc. I don't feel like this is a complete list, nor do I feel like this is a great way of saying it. I actually prefer kind of throwing the word original in there and then maybe rewording it something like this. The overall effect is dependent on the original size of the fire. To me, that makes more sense. I would also say you could go down to as small as maybe a candle, which would be like a Bic lighter basically, and you could go bigger in that. However, I would probably cap the effect to a certain point. Like I said earlier, the spell kind of creates a flash of light. It can change the color of this light. It can increase the fire briefly, essentially. Creating a small fire to roar big. It can increase the smoke amount. And these things can have extra effects as well. For example, you could blind a target. You could potentially make it so someone doesn't want to walk through the fire for that brief moment. The smoke could cause breathing problems. And if you're looking for a way out of an area, the smoke could be used to follow it out, knowing that this way is out because that's the way the smoke is going, and this way, which is not drawing smoke at all, probably goes deeper. So it gives you information that you can then use how you'd want to use. Okay, so one of the questions that comes up is this spell lasts for 6 turns. Is that 6 turns on this torch I can manipulate fire? Or is that 6 turns the spell is cast on me because I'm the one that cast it? And now I can affect fires that are within 240 feet or 24 inches on the sand table and be able to create these fireworks basically as I go for 60 minutes or 6 turns. To me, I feel like it's a second. I feel like you kind of become a fireworks show, which means that if you're running through a town trying to distract guards or trying to prevent things from following you, that could be a very interesting thing. especially if you had people around you throwing like Greek fires and this type of stuff, making it very distracting. I also think that the inverse of this could be done and would be a great way to combat someone doing that type of thing, where it doesn't necessarily just cancel it, but you could also just reduce the effect. So if you're trying to get down a hallway and it's on fire, a person with the inverse of this spell could reduce the fire so someone could pass by and then put the fire back up, preventing them from being able to walk down it unless they had some other way to protect themselves. I could also see that being cast on a torch with a group of players who are trying to navigate a dungeon, and you're like, psst, and you take their torch down to like a candle, and now they don't have the line of sight they want. Multiple people casting that could affect the whole party. Otherwise, I would say you're only doing one torch at a time, so a second torch would go ahead and remedy the problem. But if they don't have that second torch, or if torches are something they're trying to maintain because they only have so many, this could be a very powerful tool.
Okay guys, in this spell, we are going to talk about the strength spell. It introduces both a new mechanic and really a new system to the game. And ironically, I like it, but it tends to make things a little bit more complicated. Let me get into this real quick. One of the best features about this spell is the fact that it has a static 8-hour duration. This makes it durable. It makes it a static number. If you're trying to calculate how long this will last and how many miles you get with benefit before you lose your speed, for example, for being encumbered, it makes it a much easier, better way to have this spell. So I like that feature a lot. The new mechanic is that it increases a stat. This doesn't happen in any other way of the game except for maybe losses when you're fighting certain creatures. But the new system that it brings in is that the increase is based upon the class you are playing, which means that there are some complications later on, which I'll get to. So the fighter gets 2d4 strength, which is extra nice because the bell curve, meaning you're going to be pushing more to the middle and you have the highest reach potential. Ironically, again, a d6 with a cleric is actually going to be pretty close to what a fighter could roll, but the fighter has a higher potential, where a cleric and the thief both have even potential because they're only a single dice. The thief rolls a d4, that makes a lot of sense, but there's no mention of what a magic user would use. Personally, I would use a d3 for a magic user. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Now, what happens if a fighter reaches an 18 strength? Well, in this version of the game, in Supplement 1, when this spell is released, there are exceptional strength scores for fighters, and that's very specific and very important. If a class does not have a fighter in it, I would not allow them to go into this. And there's not really a whole lot it says about how this should happen, so I kind of came up with my own thing versus just rolling a percentile and having a character with like a 12 strength somehow get like an 18 which I don't feel is as genuine to the spell and realistic as a person who's like a 17 strength being able to reach an 18 I also want to clarify what I mean by percentile and exceptional strength. When a fighter reaches an 18, they roll 2d10, which is turned into percentile to give them a 0, 1 to 100 score, odd being 100. I would get with your referee first, but the way I would treat it is every pip of the dice that takes you to an 18 and then beyond gives you a bracket, and there are a total of 5 brackets. So the first bracket for a fighter is 1801 to 1850. If you roll an 18, then you would get that as a fighter. If you rolled that plus 1, you would get the 1851 to 1875. And you rolled that plus 2, you would get 1876. Now, I think that makes a lot of sense. You can end up with an 18 if you happen to get lucky. But for a fighter with a 15 strength, they roll a 5. That would take him to an 1876 strength, and the 7 would take him to an 18 Okay, so this gets a little bit more complicated if you're more than one class at the same time. For example, a fighter who is a fighter thief, which is a potential in the Supplement 1 where this spell is found, would roll 2d4 for the fighter side and a d4 for the thief side. You take that number of increased strength, you would add it together and divide it by 2, rounding down. In my opinion, that's what I would do. Therefore, you would end up with a higher potential, but then still have a little bit less because you're also a thief and you're not just getting this extra bonus for nothing, I guess would be the right way of saying it, making it a little bit more balanced. The halfling goes the same way, whether they start as a fighter or a thief and become a fighter and then a thief. It doesn't matter. I think they basically be treated the same. Ironically, though, I've used this word a couple times, an elf and a half elf would have this completely different. They basically be treated like a human in this regard for probably the first time ever. Whatever their class they're currently playing, that's what they would get. So if they're a fighter, they would get 2d4. If they were a cleric, if they could be a cleric as a half elf, then they would get a d6. And if they were a thief, which both races could be, they get a d4. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about the spell Web. To my knowledge, it's the only spell that came out technically before the spell itself came out. See, the spell came out in Supplement 1 Greyhawk, which came out in 1975. The 3 core rule books came out in 1974, and as you can see on the graphic here, this spell literally refers back to Book 2, talking about monsters and treasures as the source for where you get the information for this spell. It's a little bit odd just in that nature, but it gets weirder. Literally, it says that it lasts for 8 game hours, has a range of up to 30 feet or 3 inches on the sand table. So they're using a giant for the baseline for units of measurement for like how long it takes to break through something. But as you can see here, we can't just ignore the fact that it literally says 8 hours of gameplay. Now, what does that mean? To me, I know what that means based upon other things I've seen in the game and the fact that this was a persistent game. I think it's literally talking about 8 hours butts in seat playing at the table. Not 8 hours of real time, you go home next week, it's gone. Like 8 hours at the table, this is a thing that you have to deal with. Which then leads me down why they didn't do different things. Now let's go ahead and look at the giant side, because you just can't bypass that either. If you're going to use giants as a baseline, then you have to have used giants in the past. And we have examples of this. When it's talking about busting down a door, it says that it would take a person, basically, 10 rounds of combat to chop their way through a door with a weapon. Now, they compared that to a giant. They say it would take half the movement of a giant. It's saying that this spell is going to take 40 turns for a person with a weapon to get through it. That's 400 rounds of attacks, or that is literally 40 rounds of attacks by 10-minute arms as a weakness to fire. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a great bypass to be able to get around this type of thing. I'm confused though, and maybe this is my modern eye looking at this different with all the years of experience and seeing other terms and words used. But I don't know why they just didn't call it impassable. That would have been a lot cleaner, a lot easier way to word it, saying that anyone that entered it would have to make a save throw, that they would continue to have to make a save throw, and maybe it took 10 rounds to be able to make your way through it, essentially making it so no one would do that. I think that'd be fine. I think that the idea of 10 men spending 40 rounds going through potentially 2 combats with wandering monsters is kind of ridiculous when they could just take a torch and light it on fire and go. Now, maybe there's something in there you can't get away from, and then I could see justifying that 40 attack thing. Then that would justify only doing 400 attacks to get that thing out. However, that should be proportional and probably done by the referee, not necessarily trying to meet that in a paragraph or less in a rule book. I also would treat it as something that is conjured. The source of the spell, whether it comes from the hands or maybe there's some sort of illusionary beast that comes and then sprays the area with the web, I think is fine. Whatever you want to do with that, but leave the web there, make it permanent. Don't actually put an 8-hour window. Make it so when you walk into a dungeon that no one has been in for a long time, there's a hallway, and this hallway has been filled with web. Now, you can bypass this hallway knowing nothing's going to get through that hallway, or you can go ahead and light it on fire. The magic user says, This is done by a web spell, so whatever this is has not been disturbed since that spell's been put up. Now, that might be a true statement, or there could be something back there that has been trapped back there on purpose because maybe it's too dangerous to deal with, or maybe there's something hiding back there that doesn't want to be seen, potentially some sort of cult activity or whatever, or maybe there's some sort of beast back there that's incredibly hungry because it has nothing to eat since the spell's been basically cast. Maybe it's dead. Maybe you go back there and it's just nothing but rooms of skeletons and unguarded loot. Who knows? Maybe there's butterflies and rainbows too. But that's your world. You have to figure out what you're doing in it. Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about the spell Wizard Lock. This spell is very similar to Hold Person, but it's far more powerful in a few ways. So Hold Portal has a duration and lasts until it is broken. This can be done through strong anti-magic abilities or a dispel magic or even a knock spell. Wizard Lock can also be destroyed through strong anti-magic, of course, and a dispel magic. But if you were to cast a knock spell on the door, it would temporarily unlock the door, allow you to go through, and then the door would relock behind you. There is also the caveat that magic users that are 3 levels higher are able to go through the door without disturbing the spell. Now, it doesn't say this specifically, but I believe this is a correct statement. I believe that you should be able to pass through your own wizard locks without ending the spell, or without having to use a knock spell. Now, the other ways you can get through this spell, without using magic, of course, is if you're using Supplement 1 Greyhawk and you are a fighter with percentile strength, then you have a potential chance to push your way through it, or you can basically take an axe and chop the door down. How does this affect the dungeon since time is no longer a factor? The 4th dimension is being broke. You're able to go through and interact with the dungeon forever, and your doors that you lock remain locked. Well, if you have any sort of layout or plan, or know that this area is a dead end, or that you don't need to go explore this area, you can go ahead and just start locking doors. And that would allow you the ability to basically section off an area where no one can get to because all those areas are blocked off. All those areas are locked. You would hear them coming through the door. No one has that many dispel magics or that many knock spells. Unless it was a really high magic user, then you might have a problem. But it would allow a player to be able to maybe start strategically sieging the dungeon to take back part of it. I think that's really interesting. Okay, guys, so we're going to talk a little bit more about dungeon stuff and talk about how you can create special safe places and pathways where you could potentially leave gear, resupply stuff, leave injured, the wounded, maybe the cook once again, early start on the after combat meal, this type of thing. Maybe the magic users gotta sleep just a little bit longer to get that spell back. Anyways, lots of things you can do that. You could also use it offensively to cut off water supply, the ability to get to a certain area, to make them take a certain pathway that makes them able to be attacked easier versus privately walking quietly behind like a wall or something like that. Having things like this will allow the party to be able to push and to take over more and more control of a dungeon potentially. Now, outside of the dungeon, this also could have very similar effects. Like, for example, you could protect your house this way. The room at the inn could be blocked with a wizard lock. You could have a little bit of fun with people by locking them in the chamber pot, so they had to have someone that was a magic user with a percentile strength 3 levels higher and that type of stuff, or the ability to knock or dispel magic to be able to get out of the chamber pot, or bring an axe, right? I think this also could work on smaller items like chests, money bags, this type of stuff. Anything that we could consider a portal. Now, they've said the mouth is not considered a portal. You can't slap cheese on someone's face and make it so they can't open their eyes, for example. But you could stop the gate at the castle from opening, and that could cause some chaos for a little bit. I think stuff like that could be very interesting and really shows how this is a worldly spell when it comes to power. Okay guys, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. If you like this format, go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. I will also be doing the 3rd level magic user spells coming up here next week, so look for that. And then after that, I'm going to jump over to the cleric spells. So thank you for watching this. Have a great day and see you guys next video. Bye.